In 1898, a 20-year-old man by the name of Vincenzo D'Alessandro left the hills of Abruzzi, Italy, and immigrated to the United States of America through Ellis Island. That man was my great-grandfather. He left his family, everyone he knew, and everything he knew behind in Italy. He settled in Lucerne Mines, Pennsylvania, where he was a coal miner for his entire life. In my hand, I hold his death certificate. Of note, it says he died in House 85. House 85 was a house owned by the Rochester and Pittsburgh Coal Company. He was paid not in U.S. currency, but coal mine coin. He shopped at a grocery store owned by the coal company. His 8 children were educated at a coal mine school, the youngest of which went on to college and escaped the mines. That was my grandfather. I sit before you now, the great-grandson of a dirt-poor Italian coal miner, in the Iowa Supreme Court, applying for the Iowa Court of Appeals. That's the story of America. That's the story of Iowa. And it's that story that I'm eternally indebted to and grateful for. I stand on the shoulder of giants, giants like Vincenzo, who made sacrifices so that I can sit here and talk to you now. That will never be lost on me, and I appreciate that. There are 3 reasons why I think I'm well suited to serve on the Iowa Court of Appeals, the first of which is my litigation background. It's been said that rough seas make a smooth sailor. I've sailed the rough seas. I've sat across from human beings who have struggled and endured unimaginable tragedy, trauma, and I've brought them through the courtroom to a jury verdict. They've entrusted me. The second reason that I think that I'm well suited to serve on the Iowa Court of Appeals is what I call drive or curiosity. What I lack for in natural intelligence, I make up for in my work ethic. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, and I work hard. The third attribute that I think makes me well suited to serve on the Court of Appeals is I don't have sharp elbows. If you talk to my colleagues, Judges Peterson, Wittenberg, Mayer, or Borth, they all would tell you that I'm the first to volunteer. I'm a team player. I don't like drama. I try to avoid it if possible. I think that more than ever right now is needed on the Court of Appeals, somebody that's a team player. I appear in 10 counties as a District 3A judge. If you talk to the 10 clerk of courts that I appear in front of, I think they'll all uniformly agree that I'm easy to approach, I'm easy to communicate with, I'm responsive to their emails, and I'm a good team player. I thank you all for your time, and I welcome any questions you might have for me this afternoon.
And let's start those questions with Commissioner Picklett.
Hi, Judge. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Could you take some time? I was maybe drawn to your application, specifically your work as a public defender in Nobles County and some of the challenges you faced up there, and what you learned, and maybe it's accessibility issues, maybe it's certain barriers, socioeconomic or linguistic or whatever. Could you talk to your experience up there and what skills you learned and overcame that could translate to the bench?
Sure. Adaptability, and the reason I say that is, a lot of my clients in Nobles County in particular, aside from not being able to speak English, frankly didn't have a roof over their head. They weren't so much concerned about showing up for court on time. They were more worried about what their next meal was going to look like. And so understanding that context was important for me to understand my expectations of them and how I communicated with them. Also, there's significant cultural differences with folks that weren't born and raised in the United States. Frankly, statutes don't care about cultural differences. So having to bring those two worlds together for folks oftentimes was challenging in terms of my communication style. And so I think that those are things that were more pronounced in Nobles County than perhaps other counties that I had worked as a public defender in.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stanger.
Thank you. Hi, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I was going to ask about collegiality, but you went with the sharp elbows, so we're good there. Would you comment about how you would enhance the legitimacy of the courts, as far as the courts are under attack, and how might you and your approach as being on the bench grow public trust in the courts?
Sure. In the 3.5 years since I've been on the bench, it certainly has been a shift in terms of public comments. I deleted my Facebook account, for example. Although I must admit, sometimes I use my wife's to find things or to look at something. But certainly, I agree, the courts are under attack, no doubt. I think less so perhaps maybe on some scale at the state level than on the national scale, but no less under attack. I guess the best way I can answer that is I don't have solutions to big problems at the macro level like that. I control what I control. And what I control is the courtroom. I control the work I put out. I control how I treat people. And so I always try to keep in mind that for a lot of folks, they'll only see one judge one time in their life. Most folks aren't in the courtroom a lot. If they leave that experience thinking it was rigged or a sham, or that I had my mind made up before I heard the facts of the case, that does a real disservice to the branch. And so I always try to keep in mind that even though this may be my 8th or 9th hearing of the day, it's not theirs. And I got to keep that in mind with how I treat them and how they walk away with their perception of the court.
Thank you.
No problem.
Commissioner Hoig?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Spies?
Judge Sandy, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
You know, I wonder about how judges perceive self-improvement. And I know that every 2 years, the attorneys of Iowa fulfill their duty in giving feedback to judges through the judicial evaluations that are performed. What are your sources of feedback about how you're doing, aside from appellate courts, about how you're doing as a judge?
Sure. Well, as you know, we have the State Bar Association survey that's put out during the time period in which we stand for retention. And my results were good with that. However, I'd only been on the bench for a year. I don't know how long before those came out. So everybody's good to start with. You know, judges tend to not age
Thank
well.
God for averages, huh?
Yeah, right. That being said, though, you bring up something that I think is important and serendipitous timing. I'm sure Court Administrator Bob Gast may not appreciate me saying this, but I'm going to say it. A week or so ago, I emailed Mr. Gast, and I indicated that I've been seeing that the court staff employees receive reviews, but yet judges don't receive reviews from court staff. And I think I talked to Mr. Schnurr about this maybe during my interview with him. Why not? I mean, we should not live in echo chambers. It's okay for us to know how we're doing, how we treat people. Are we timely with things? And who better to give that input than the people we work with every day? So I think that that's something that I would like to see changed, and in fact have emailed to ask that, hey, let's look into this. And my understanding is other states do that. New Mexico being one of them. I think part of their reviews are from court staff, actually.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hartka?
Hi, Judge. It's good to see you again. Thank you for applying. Could you talk about your work in the juvenile law space and how that could be an asset to you if you're chosen to be a finalist and ultimately selected?
Sure. So there's two things that I dealt with in the juvenile law space. The first of which was early on in my practice, I mean, I took whatever came in the door, frankly, because I had bills to pay, and I didn't have the luxury of being selective. And so I oftentimes worked with, in particular, young teenagers in the context of juvenile delinquency cases. I did that a lot in Minnesota as well. As my practice grew, my ability to be more selective also grew, and so I stopped doing that. However, I did represent a number of younger individuals, teenage years, in civil litigation matters. One was against the Sibley-Ocheyedan School District for sexual abuse by a teacher. Another was some abuses that had been perpetrated on some young teenage girls with troubles at juvenile homes, these types of things. So I'd interact often with what I would consider to be teenage individuals, both men and women, and in that context. In terms of the child in need of assistance matters, not a lot. I mean, probably a few years at the onset of my career. However, my mom, as many of you know, was a career guardian ad litem attorney in the juvenile justice system. So she's my role model, and I spent a lot of time with her and in that. So I have great respect for that field.
Commissioner Summerroth?
Judge, you come here with a reputation as you were an excellent trial lawyer and had a lot of success. And in my experience, people who have that kind of success go on to become one type of judge or another. Either you hold everybody to the incredibly high standard that you set when you were on the bench, and it's very hard for lawyers and litigants to live up to that, or that practical experience really impacts how you run your courtroom. And I'm wondering, how does that apply on the appellate court? And what assurances do we have that we could live up to your standards on the Court of Appeals?
Yeah, better put, how do I know you won't micromanage an attorney's case because you're, second chairing it on the Court of Appeals type thing? Yeah, I get it. It's a good question. Well, it's complicated, I think. You've only given me two choices, right? You've boxed me in a little bit. And I think it's and both, right? And so I think you can still hold attorneys to a high standard. We should expect that, okay? The citizens of the state of Iowa deserve that. They deserve good representation and not cutting corners. That being said, there is so much that happens off the record. I mean, I can't even begin to describe to you how much happens off the record. And you don't want judges considering things not on the record, okay? So I'm not saying that you want judges considering things not in evidence. But just having that sixth sense, that gut, as kind of what's going on and why, I think is really important. I think a good court of appeals is a balanced court of appeals. And so that's one of the strengths I think I bring to that, is that type of balance and that experience and that knowledge. So that would be what I'd say. But yeah, that is a struggle. Even on the district bench, that's a struggle. Look, I know that you could be doing this better, or have you looked at that? But also being, able to understand life happens and talk to me about what's going on here and that type of thing, and trying to be patient and understanding of that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Henderson,
I have no questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Roberts,
No questions, thanks.
Commissioner Hanson,
No questions.
Commissioner Schnur.
It's nice to see you again, Judge.
Good to see you.
I want to ask a little bit about civics education. I think we talked a little bit about it when we spoke one-on-one. Civics education is kind of important in my mind, and it's a real need, I think, in our communities. What role, if any, do you see members of the Court of Appeals playing in improving civics education, providing civics education? And you individually, what role do you think you could play?
Sure. I mean, I can tell you that at my 3-year-old daughter's preschool program, I presided over the trial of who stole the cookie from the cookie jar. And the teacher was convicted. Not by a jury of her peers, but a jury of the 3-year-olds. But stuff like that matters, right? I mean, I had a ridiculous white wig on that I had bought, and the kids all were making fun of me about the black dress and talking to them about that. But I think that type of interaction is important. The other thing is, as I was waiting to come in, Megan Tooker, the Chief Justice's attorney, approached me and talked to me about an invitation I had extended to the Supreme Court to come to the Spirit Lake High School. We have a beautiful auditorium there, thanks to the Bedell family. And so incorporating the government class in Spirit Lake, their seniors that take government, is important. I always talk to the students at the government class. Mr. Schmidt invites me in to talk to them on a regular basis. And then I also talk to the local Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, these types of things about the work I'm doing, in particular with drug court and other things. But I think having a good public relations and reputation with the community beyond just what you may see in the courtroom is really important. And I think that's the best civics lesson that one can give.
Thank you.
Commissioner Graber.
Oh, great to see you again. I enjoyed our one-on-one time. I go back to your story that you talked about with your great-grandfather and a coal miner and having to endure some things maybe for the next generation. So let's imagine that you do get this position. Do you think that your colleagues would have to endure anything as you, as the junior member coming onto the Court of Appeals? I
mean, I don't know so if that's a loaded question. First off, would they like me? I don't know. You know, but second off, that presumes I get picked, right? Which I would not presume. But all that being said, I get your point. And I think it goes back to sharp elbows. I mean, I think you can have disagreements. I want to be clear here. Just because you disagree with somebody doesn't necessarily mean you got to be a jerk about it. I mean, there's a way where you can be non-condescending and explain, listen, this is where I understand what you're saying, but here's where I'm coming from with that issue, and here are the things I'm thinking about. I could be wrong, but here's why I'm thinking that way, and that type of thing. I think that that's important, and I think that ability to communicate with people without demonizing the person has been lost and eroded over time. And so I think that that's important, and I hope that I would do that if appointed.
Commissioner Parrish?
I want to follow up on Mr. Simirov's question just a little bit from a little different angle. Not to box you in at all.
Sharks in
I
the
would
water.
never do anything like that. But let's a hypothetical question. Let's presume out there that there are a group of lawyers who think that the appellate court is interjecting their opinion in place of the jury, which could be a rumor floating around, and not calling any names. But my question to you is, how do you, as a appellate judge, look at the role of the jury? If there's some fear amongst trial lawyers that the appellate court is doing a little bit more than what they should do in terms of substituting their opinion from that of the jury.
Sure. I think a jury is sacrosanct. I mean, it's the bedrock of our democracy in terms of at least to the judiciary. But it goes back to what I told Mr. DeFord and Mr. Hartkop, that at the end of the day, if we can't trust the people, who are we going to trust? An oligarchy? Who are we going to trust? So really what your question's getting at is, do you trust a set of 9 judges or whoever more than you trust 12 people in a box? Not just 12 people, but 12 people from that community who sat and heard the evidence presented and who had the tough decision to deliberate. I think it's disrespectful in some ways to entrust them with that process and the sacrifice they make to do that, only to take it away. So I'm not saying that's never appropriate, but I would tell you, boy, you better be really sure of yourself if you're going to go down that road, because it's the people, in my opinion, that have the ultimate say, always. Not just in jury trials, in anything. It's the people.
Thank you.
Commissioner DeFord?
Good afternoon, Jen Sandy. For the sake of my question, let's just say you're nominated to the Court of Appeals, then fast forward to maybe being in Chief Judge Bauer's shoes, nearing the end of his time on the Court of Appeals. What would you want your legacy to be?
That I was kind. That I was kind. I don't, better put, I think people won't remember the status I have or the position I have, but they'll remember how I treated them.
Thank you.
Commissioner Marquardt?
One of the things that was mentioned in your application and came up in letters that we received about you was how you started the drug court or were instrumental in getting the drug court started in your district. How does this dedication to what you call transformative justice, how would that enhance the Court of Appeals?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, look, I'm not a substance abuse counselor. I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is that incarcerating as many drug addicts as you possibly can has not worked out well over the past 20 or 30 years. And so I think taking a fresh approach at looking at fiscally, how do we deal with it? Also looking at, how do we keep folks in the community but keep them off drugs and ensure community safety needs to be looked at. And at least in District 3A, that wasn't occurring because we didn't have drug court. We had 10 counties and we didn't have drug court. And that was a problem. And so I think understanding mental disease, including use, addiction, is important. I think it's important at the Court of Appeals, especially when you're looking at issues of sentencing options and looking at due process even within drug court. I think it's important to understand those things. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
And our time is up. So we appreciate your application and wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.